I will now share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of input about global social witnessing now. I think we've really had an experience of being in this group together and hearing all those voices from all those different points on the globe, which is already in itself a wonderful example of what that can mean and kind of how technology would enable us to become, to grow together as global citizens on the planet. So there is a technology that enables us, but the question is, do we use it? Do we do it? And I want to start with this. If global social witnessing didn't exist, we'd better invent it. That's my claim. And why is that? So first, we live in a highly interconnected world. Current and forthcoming major challenges cannot be solved but globally. And as I see in this group, we are pretty aware of that. There's been a lot of mentioning of that there's a sadness or there's a fear. There are all those emotions that we carry individually, but collectively, usually we don't give them space, right? So there is some part of us who notices we are global citizens. We live, we create this thing here together. But then we are left alone with the feelings that this evokes in us. So we need to come together globally to solve those challenges. And third, for chances of human survival to increase, a number of competencies, including awareness and communication, should better match the level of complexity we actually engage in. So we engage in a high level of complexity, and we do that. We've been doing that now. I mean, since the Industrial Revolution, at least, we've been engaging in a high level of complexity with the whole ecosystem. But are we aware of it? Does the level, the capacity of our awareness and how we communicate about things actually match that complexity that we create through our actions? And fourth, there is the possibility to practice our awareness and to practice our communication so we can develop those competencies. It's not that we are doomed. And some people mentioned also that sense of excitement. So there is an excitement that we create this together. And there is also a calling of a higher future, I would say, that we can move towards. But it requires something. So hence the proposition of global social witnessing as a practice for awareness-based global citizenship. And that is what we've been practicing already. Witnessing is also a leadership capacity. In which ways? First, if we think of leadership as a capacity of a collective to shape its future, then global social witnessing is developing that capacity. So it's not an individual leader who is leading a group, but how do we collectively co-create and lead and shape the future that we want to create? So these are some premises for global social witnessing as a leadership capacity. Then in order to change a system, you need to make the system see itself. So it's not enough to declare climate change as a global catastrophe and then come up with, okay, we do this and this, and then it's going to be solved. That in the level of complexity that we engage in, that of course some steps like this are necessary. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but we need to become aware of how we are actually creating the mess and how it has been created. So So how do we participate in the making of the problems? So we got to make the system see itself. And a wonderful person called Sten. So, and that is of course the work of Otto Scharmer. He's focusing on that, making the system see itself. And many of you who are on the call also work in facilitating change processes. And this is I mean, we're familiar with that. It's kind of the job description of a good facilitator. And a wonderful person named Sten Hildebrand, who's a professor at I think Copenhagen Business School, and who devotes so he's professor, and he devotes the rest of his life to the Sustainable Development Goals. So he's working on those global issues, and he's very clear that in shaping global matter, each one of us counts. And it's true, like each individual is important for those global topics. This is another perspective that we can take on global social witnessing. It is, we engage in that triangle. In the lower left corner of the triangle is the self and the value of this, and this is something that can be cultivated. How am I aware of myself? How can I care for my own integrity? And on the lower right corner, it's something that can be cultivated as well. It's the resonance with another, the communication, the empathy, the compassion with others. And then on the upper corner of the triangle is the position of the larger system. And as a global citizen, you always move between those three. So there's an awareness of the self, there's an awareness of the others, of the social aspect, and of the global aspect, of the larger system that we are embedded in. And so this is an interesting model. I'm going to share the slides with you, and you can read a little bit more about it. We can come back to it if that's interesting for you. It's just a reflective surface, this triangle that we can stay aware of. How aware am I of myself, of my connection with the others, and of the larger system that we are surrounded, that the context that we are in. These are some key questions for global social witnessing. I think I mentioned them already. How do I relate to the global systemic processes and events that I am embedded in? For example, how am I aware of my body when I read the news? I mean, that's just an indicator of the level of my awareness. Am I totally stuck in my head? Or do I, and that is what the practice that Thomas Hübl devised and is very much about, do I include my body? Do I include my emotions? Do I include my thoughts, but not being lost in them, but being aware of the thoughts that pop up? So these are some indicators of the level of awareness that I can bring to the fact of being embedded in a global context, embedded in those processes, and co-creating them to some tiny degree, but to a degree. Second question, do we collectively possess the competencies to global challenges? For example, are we able to communicate in a generative way about tough matters? Are we able to communicate in a generative way about tough matters in our relationship? Right? So these things are related. Are we able to do that on a level of countries? And the third question, how can we cultivate these competencies? So how can we cultivate to really face what science tells us about climate change without being so overwhelmed, as Rick said, that we can't act anymore? And I don't have that here as a slide, but what witnessing or global social witnessing really aims for is to find that spot, that sweet spot of responsibility, of the ability to respond. So this practice is not intended to make us all burned out because it is so terrible what is happening on the globe right now and the future scenarios that we know. This is really not the intention. but it's to find a way of relating to these things that we all know, actually, and to create a space and to create a container in a group, so that it's not me individually who's suffering from the weight of the world, but it's our collective responsibility. So we're doing a little exercise with this. The climate crisis, this is a quote. This has been published yesterday, or was it today, that Trump actually, he signed, like he finally dropped out the Paris Agreement on climate change. And the same day, of 11,258 scientists from 153 countries published this article in a journal called Bioscience. And it's a quote from that article. The climate crisis has arrived and is accelerating faster than most scientists expected. It is more severe than anticipated, threatening natural ecosystems and the fate of humanity. This is what 11,258 scientists from 153 countries have published yesterday. And there are just some lines that we don't need to focus on right now, but just let that sentence resonate and be aware of how that lands in you right now. Be aware of any responses in your body, is there a tightness or a warmth, or how does that land in you? And be aware of the fact that we are here as a group together. So each one of us right now is available with his or her awareness to read this and to know, to receive this piece of information. Whatever the response is, it can be doubt, it can be also like, I don't believe this, or whatever the response is that you have. But you make an effort to be aware of your own response. So can I hear a few voices of what is popping up? Are there any images or feelings or sensations popping up? So I just want to bring in your feet now once more. You feel your feet on the ground. You can also move them a little bit to make you all the, like, be aware of any sensation that is in the feet. Let yourself really feel that. And just the whole sensations of your base once more. So there's legs, you have legs, you are here, you are alive, you are breathing, you have legs. And right now, every one of us is in a very safe space, so we can just sit here together. And feel our legs. And be aware that there are lots of emotions in the group, like that there's something going on underneath the surface of reading just news headlines that usually is not given any space. And so now we've just given it just a little bit of space. What actually happens when we become aware of what is really happening in the world. And it's totally fine if, I actually encourage you to also not totally move into it, but if there's like a resistance and an impulse to kind of stay out of that, then totally follow that impulse. There's no obligation in any way of moving into those emotions. But if it happens, it is allowed. The witnessing part is merely becoming aware of all the responses, be it nausea or anger or skepticism or just zoning out or whatever it is. Any response is perfectly fine. The practice is really being aware of the response. And I do appreciate what Saskia says, that certainly like we all are privileged just by the definition, because we can be in this call right now. That is definitely something to be acknowledged. Is there anything else? Just maybe a couple of words more from anybody? How does checking in with your body affect your relationship to that piece of information? All right, thank you. So I will move on with the presentation now. And come to a definition of global social witnessing. So what we have experienced now can maybe help us understand what this whole concept is about. So global refers to large-scale events and processes affecting large numbers of people or the planet as a whole. And social refers to the fact of interrelatedness of humanity. And witnessing points to the capacity of fully attending to and testifying to critical events. So global social witnessing is at its core really the human capacity to relate to those processes, events, and situations in our larger systems with mindful, compassionate, and embodied awareness. That doesn't mean we have to feel compassion, but our awareness is holding whatever is happening. And there's another way of speaking of it. So we can speak of global social witnessing when global events and processes are met with compassionate awareness of interconnectedness, while staying in touch with a natural sense of possibility and holding the tension between reality and possibility. So this is giving it a different twist, even if these possibilities may not be realized in one's own lifetime. Because when we read those news, right, that is not at all what we wish the world to look like. But there is a wish in all of us for the world. There is something that we actually would wish, just by noticing that, oh, that's not what I want, that points to there is something that I want. And be able to hold the tension between what we know from science about the state of the world, what we would wish it to be like, is also a practice of witnessing. And this is enabling an embodied practice of compassionate global citizenship. So really being able more and more to holding that tension together. So since this is maybe for another time, we could do that exercise. I will jump a bit. This is just a very meta reflection on what we are doing. So what global social witnessing involves is you choose to pay attention to a world event. You allow yourself to be affected by it. You become aware of those little things that happen. So become aware of the phenomenal impressions on various levels. So what happens mentally, what happens emotionally, what happens somatically, what happens, and you witness those. And then you communicate it. So there's a communication involved. and then it can go another round. We didn't do this now, but that's how it works. This is something really that I really want to bring in. It's just adding a little bit of neurobiology to what we're doing. I've been working with Tanja Singer, who's been like a social neuroscientist from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and she's been studying social cognition. So how do humans understand what's going on in another human being? And one way that we all know, a word that we all know, is empathy. And empathy is that basic capacity to resonate with another. And I say like with another, but this also relates to the world at large. As Rick said, you can be so empathic that it makes you overwhelmed. And this is really the distinction here is from empathy, you can go from that basic capacity to resonate with what is happening in another or on a larger level, you can go into empathic distress. So that means you have negative feelings of stress. It relates to poor health and burnout, to withdrawal and non-social behavior, and all sorts of self-related emotions. So you're really, it's too much. You're an overload, right? But there's also another path that it can take, and that's more an other related emotion of compassion. So this involves positive feelings like love and correlates with good health and an approach and pro-social motivation. And this is exactly what Rick, what you shared, right? When you connect with the field of the group, in the moment you connect with the field of the group and you feel, there's a holding here, and there are others, and I don't have to do the whole thing. That sense of being embedded actually strengthens us to face what is out there. And I would say the path of compassion rather than to the path of empathic distress. And all those different concepts like empathy, compassion, empathic distress can also be looked at as various levels of what can eventually lead to become witnessing. And this looks like this. So this is a ladder, or these are levels of social connectedness. Actually, next time I do it, I will draw ladders. Imagine you're up the ladder. Up the ladder is the emotional disconnect, the objectification. So there is no connection with another. You make the other an object and you judge it. And from that point, you can kill somebody, you can do genocide. I mean, this is something that humans do, and that is available to all of us. Every one of us does it, and we all objectify. And it is something that can be done collectively. It can be done as whole groups can move into objectification mode. And we can do that. We could do that even with the planet as a whole. There's no much connection involved when we do that. One level below that, already a little bit more connected, is empathic distress. Empathic distress, what we just shared, I feel that the pain of the other is kind of attacking me, and I don't want to hang out with that person because there's so much, it's just triggering me so much, I don't want to hang out with you. That would be an empathic distress response. Then in-group empathy means, and that's maybe also what Saskia, what you pointed to, we can all be very this is very hardwired in humans, right? Humans have kind of a range of 150 people that we can relate to personally. And beyond that, it becomes very difficult. Like we don't, our in-group is very small usually. So we can have empathy and we can have a natural like feeling of I belong to them, they belong to me, I'm empathic with them. But it's all only within that small in-group that we have. And of course, like there are social technologies, you could say, that expand the in-group to become a nation, which is already kind of an artificial in-group, but it is also an in-group. And then we against the other nations. So in-group empathy is very good. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's limited. How can we expand that is through cognitive perspective taking. So that is the capacity to think oneself into another, to put myself into another person's shoes, even if I don't have like an initial resonance like of a liking. So it is still possible to cognitively put yourself into another person's shoes that you don't immediately feel connected with. And this is something that also, like, I mean, therapists, facilitators have to train that to kind of be able to hold space for many people. And below that yet is compassion, which is still a deeper way of connecting, because it's not only from the head, it actually, you can practice to, and I know many of you have, practice your compassion, practice to widen it, practice your heart to include a wider and wider and wider circle of care. And this is, of course, like in Buddhism, it's a practice. In other spiritual traditions, this is a practice that people do to cultivate their heart. And one level below that is what we call here neutral awareness. Or what actually, this model comes from Peter Senge and Mette Böll and their compassionate systems approach. So they term it in this model neutral awareness. And this is what I would say really corresponds to witnessing. It is that merely so it is. 11,253 scientists from 153 countries say that sentence. So it is. It is so. This capacity to really acknowledge that this is what is happening. 2 weeks ago, we had a seminar at Wittenberg University, and a person was sharing a story about Rwanda and how one of the perpetrators was accompanied when he went to a scene of a crime where he murdered many people. And he was kind of hesitating to go there, but then also his body language was somehow inviting the journalist who came with him to ask him, to keep asking, because he somehow needed, the perpetrator himself needed to be seen in that. The journalist came along, and then the person was telling, this is where I shot them, this is where I did this, this is where I did this. And there was a holding for that whole through neutral awareness, through really seeing, so it is, so it happened. And then an intelligence arises that is not available otherwise, arises in the whole group. And below that is profound interconnectedness, and which is just the basis of, I don't know if I can talk well about it. This seems to be a very profound experience you have maybe once in a while, or some people may access that more often, but I think it just relates to just the arising of that all that is arises from the same source, and all that is really interconnected. It really is one big movement of presence. And being aware, of course, why I'm sharing those steps of the ladder or those levels is that you can kind of have an inner compass on which step of the ladder am I at. And developing that compass is already part of becoming more of a witness, more present to how am I showing up to the situation I'm in.
Lucas, I hate to jump in because it feels like we're in the middle of a song right now. But we reached the end of the time.
Yeah, I'm aware. I'm aware of the time.
Yeah, but I just want to suggest that I think when you got to the last part of these interconnectedness, I have the feeling that you really gave us a taste of that somehow. And I think it's really, who am I to conclude? It's not about wrapping it up. It's, I just wanted to say it's time right now to say, I guess, goodbye for now. And maybe we could add a few words in a few minutes, just around the practical thing, because we can go to Witten at the end of March. Maybe you would like to say something about this to continue the story. And really, forgive me for jumping in, because you were
thank
really...
you. Yeah. You were right about when we do a round, it takes 2 hours. So it took 1 hour. So I had to shorten the rest of it.
Yeah.
But thank you. Okay. I'm going to share my screen once more to just give some details. If you feel like global social witnessing is something you want to explore more in practice, we have an upcoming conference in Witten University. These are some of the people that will show up. So there's Thomas Hübel, there's Klaus Otto Scharmer, at least on screen. They had a wonderful dialogue about global social witnessing in a collective trauma summit recently, and they want to continue that. So we have, for example, Mette Böll down here, who is came up with these levels of connectedness, and many others. So there are really wonderful researchers coming, scientists and practitioners, and many from the CMM community, from Thomas Hübel's community, from the presencing community, and different kinds of workshops to together really explore and co-create new ideas, strategies, tools, and energy to help us become mature global citizens in our times of disruption and transformation. Thank you very much for joining this call. And if you need to leave immediately, I say goodbye. Otherwise, I would just invite everyone to say 2 words. How are you right now? What do you take from here? Maybe just really, don't say a sentence, or if you have to, make it very short so we can respect the time of everyone. And yes, so I'm Lukas. I feel awake and grateful for all of you. Thank you.